correspondent. For those local people here in Los Angeles, he was also an anchorman at KNBC. He is now living the life on his olive farm near Sacramento. He's an esteemed artist, also a third generation Sicilian. So, gosh, we have an awful lot to talk to you about, Bill. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, welcome to our little place in Winters, California. Winters is a small town. Its population 7,500. We're about 45 miles outside of Sacramento, 45 minutes from Sacramento, near Davis and Vacaville for people who know the area up here. And this is an agricultural zone. It's famous for growing walnuts and almonds and apricots and tomatoes. And you alluded to my olives. We planted 200 olive trees here 2.5 years ago, and we're expecting our first crop this fall. So it's very exciting times.
There's that news voice. You got to love it. You never really can let it go. You might be up there, in farm country, but you still got that deep voice going on, Bill. So thank you so much. I have to ask you this. We're going to get into a little bit with your career. We're going to get talk about what you're doing up there, your artwork. But how do you let go from being a news person? Because you know that it's constant. How do you let it go and just sort of live a different life like you are?
I don't know. I felt like I'd done it for 35 years, and I thought I've done all I really care to do. And, I felt I'd had certain accomplishments, and the latter part of my career was very rewarding. The first part was very different. And I just felt like, enough's enough. And the transition wasn't that difficult, to be honest with you. And we found that living in Los Angeles was becoming a little too expensive, a little too crowded, a little too problematic. There are a lot of problems living in the big city, and we wanted to live a smaller life, and began a 10-year search for the right place. And three years ago, we were up here. My wife and I have our business partners. We have a small production company. We do small films for private companies and for people. And we were up here shooting a small film about a farmer, and we had our feet on the ground and looking around and realized, hey, this is not such a bad place. And eventually ended up finding a house with a piece of land, and it all happened very quickly. And like I say, we've been up here this is going on our third year, and no regrets at all. The transition was not that difficult, oddly enough.
Yeah. You know why? Because it happened organically. That's why. It's not like you were planning it for many years and see what's going to happen. It just was. Let's talk about.
I'll tell you if you were to ask me the biggest change, other than just being out of a population center and living in a small town, was that when we moved up here, we brought all the furniture up and everything, and I never plugged in the television. And so it's been 3 years since I've watched television. And it's been a really interesting experiment. We can get our news from the internet, obviously, and can be very selective and can watch, Netflix and that kind of stuff. But that television set is still wrapped in plastic in the garage, and we have no desire to hook it up. So it's been really interesting coming from a guy who used to have the television set on night and day, just in the background. So this is getting way ahead of the story, but we got evacuated last year because of the wildfires in this area. We went to stay at a friend's house who lived, far enough away to be out of the danger zone. And they had a television set in the bedroom, and I turned it on, and I realized it's the first time I'd seen television in a couple of years. And it really was like, wow, they're really talking fast and loud. I'm not used to that. So I guess I really have left that world behind.
Gosh, you know what? That's such a healthy thing to do, though. We have a little mountain place, and it's kind of older, and we just unplugged our TV. We never miss it when we're up there. Don't go to it. Hardly even go on the internet. I highly recommend it to anyone who thinks they can't do it. Unplugging is very healthy, and I think we'd have a much healthier society, honestly, if we all did that. All of us TV news people, right? If we all just give advice to other people and say, go ahead, unplug me, it's fine. Sure. Let's start a little bit early in your career. I know that you were raised in Phoenix, and I love it, right? Your first TV gig was on what? K-Cool. But you quickly became a known name in news. Let's talk a little bit about your network work that you've done. Would you tell our audience?
Well, the last, might have been 14 or 15 years, I worked for CBS News. I
Right.
was, as you mentioned, I was an anchor in Los Angeles, a weekend anchorman at KNBC for 7 or 8 years, 1985 to 1992. And in 1992, I decided I wanted to do something. I actually wanted to do something a little more serious. I wanted to see a little bit more of the country and the world, and managed to get a job working for the CBS Evening News with Dan Rather. That was in April of 1992. Now that date
Wow.
may bring some memories back, because I joined the network the week of the Los Angeles riots. And so there I was, the local guy who knew LA, had been around forever, standing on the roof, sort of broadcasting to the world, as the city burned. So it kind of jump started my network career, because I got a big story right out of the gate. And I eventually ended up doing a number of things at the network. I got a call from the bosses in New York later in 1992, and said, "Would you like to cover one of the president? We want you to cover one of the presidential candidates for the campaign in 1992." And I said, "Okay, which one? Bush Senior or Clinton?" And they said, "No, we'd like you to cover Ross Perot, who was the kind of a wackadoodle third-party candidate who ended up getting 15% of the vote back then, and really threw the race, I think, to Bill Clinton. So he was an important historic figure, but a very strange man." And I went off to Dallas, and I covered that for a while, then came back, worked for a short-lived magazine program called Eye to Eye with Connie Chung, which was sort of like a little 60 Minutes, but a little bit lighter. And then I joined 48 Hours and sort of finished up my career with the last 7 or 8 years mostly covering murder mysteries and serial killers and true crime stories that played out over an hour on television. Very popular program that's still on the air today. And had a really good time traveling around the country and flying back and forth, and meeting a lot of very bad people, and trying to get them to tell their stories and shine a light on those who are trying to solve crimes and help victims of crimes. And so that was very rewarding. But like I said, at the end of the day, I felt like I'd done enough. And so here we are.
You said Ross Perot was kind of a crazy guy, right? What was he like? What was it for those of us who used to watch him on TV, who remember that famous "I'm all ears" sort of thing that he said? What was he like, since you were up close and personal with Mr. Perot?
Well, first of all, no one ever got up close and personal with him, because he had a campaign that was set up like no other campaign. He didn't do any campaigning. He never went out and met anybody. He would go on the Larry King show, and he would say controversial things, and that would get picked up. And every now and then he would show up at his Dallas headquarters, and I remember chasing him across the lawn once to get him to comment on something, and it was like, he thought, you would have thought that I was some assassin coming after him. He was very kind of a paranoid kind of guy. We used to joke that every now and then, he'd step out from behind a curtain like the Wizard of Oz, and he'd make a pronouncement, and then he would leave, wouldn't take any questions. He was like the uncandidate, but he had this appeal to, that it was not business as usual. It was not politics as usual. And like I say, he got 15% of the vote and really changed the course of that election. Had he not been in that race, I don't think Bill Clinton would have won in 1992. And then who knows how history would have unfolded after that.
I like how you said you chased him across the lawn. For people who haven't worked in TV news, it's a lot of chasing people down, right? Whether it's Ross Perot or someone in local news, whatever is happening, right? Don't you often find that no wonder why you are where you are, relaxing with your olive trees behind you? Because, right, just tell people who don't know what it's like. First of all, on a day-to-day basis, you're not quite sure where you're going to be, right? One day you're chasing Ross Perot, another day you're covering the riots. Just walk people through what that's like.
Well, it's the local news beat is very different than
Yes.
the network. Well, my network experience was mostly in the magazine format. So I would could work on a story for a year. Would work typically
Right.
on 5 or 6 stories at the same time with 5 or 6 different producers. And the way it would really work for me is that our producers are very talented, really off the air. They're really reporters, so they will go out and they
Yeah.
will sort of dig up the facts of the story, feed them back to me, go out and meet the people, arrange for the interviews, and then we would work together on developing the story, and then I would say fly to Nebraska or something, and then I would sit down for hours with the family of the murder victim, or the cop, or the detective, or go to a prison and sit down with the guy accused of murdering his family. And then they would take that back to New York. I would go off to another story, and I would go do the same thing with another team, and then we would all sort of catch up later, and I would come to New York, or they would come to Los Angeles, and then we would work with an editor. We would put the whole thing together, and then it would go on the air. But as 48 Hours started as a program that was literally shot over 48 hours. It was a very innovative program, and it started out with a special called 48 Hours on Crack Street. That was a little bit before my time, but it spun off into 48 Hours at the firehouse, 48 Hours in the emergency room, 48 Hours with the Coast Guard. And so what we would is we would assemble these teams of reporters. I would take a producer, and we would shoot for 48 hours, and that was it. And that was the story. And we did that for a number of years. But then we kind of ran out of places that were interesting over a course of 48 hours. And I remember we did one. I think the last one we did was 48 Hours at the rodeo. And I felt like we were sort of really stretching it a little bit. It was just, it was not that exciting, 48 Hours at the rodeo. And so we morphed it into a 1 hour, the kind of program you see today really on Dateline, and there's one, I don't know what the one is on ABC, but 48 Hours, where you take one story, you expand it out, you tell the victim's story, you tell the killer's story, you tell the cop's story, and hopefully you weave this interesting tale that will keep you riveted to the television set for an hour. So that's right. the last kind of block of work that I did when I was at the network.
What about some of the international work that you've done, right? Could you talk to us about that? I mean, the first Gulf War, Kuwait oil fields. Can you just give people a little taste of some of that you've done as well? Yeah. It's pretty, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, being an international correspondent is a real art form, and I'm not going to pretend to be a great international correspondent. But I did get a chance to participate in some international stories. I was in Tiananmen Square. I was not there during the uprising, but I was there the following week, which was as Beijing was trying to put itself back together, and those were very dicey times because you couldn't shoot video, although we rigged up bicycles with hidden cameras in it, because if the Chinese soldiers caught you, you would be arrested and put in prison. So we kind of took a lot of risks there. I went over to the first Gulf War, and after Saddam Hussein had left and blown up the Kuwaiti oil fields, and I mean, it was literally raining oil all day long. A really fascinating sight to see, and the sort of the destruction there. I was in Somalia. I was there on New Year's Eve in a place called Baidoa, which was nicknamed the City of Death, after the Marines had come in and dug in, and the U.S. Marines had come help to save Somalia. And then I was there as it sort of descended back into anarchy. There were a lot of dicey moments there. Things like that. But I would work side by side with some of the real pros, the guys like Bob Simon and Tom Fenton, some of these really hardcore guys who really made a living, made a life out of traveling to world hotspots and covering wars. And I'll be honest with you, it's not for me. I don't think I'm that courageous, or I'm that daring, or that adventurous or competitive to succeed in that world. But it was interesting to be able to sort of dip my feet into it and sort of get a little taste of, sort of how international news works.
Okay, being a newsman, is this something you've always wanted to do since you were a little kid? Now I'm going to go back a little bit, right? You're third generation Sicilian. Is this something that you talk about at home? I mean, how did you end up doing this? And talk to me a little bit about your Italian background.
Well, it's hard to take apart the Italian background first. So I know a lot of your guests will have spoken about growing up in an Italian-American family, and how that, all the culture and the food and the language and how all of the relatives and all that kind of stuff. I had none of that. I was third generation. My great-grandfather, Giovanni Battista Lagattuta, Was born in a small village in Sicily called Mezzoiuso. It's outside of Palermo. I've been there a number of times. Poor little place. Like so many Sicilian immigrants of that time, he emigrated to the United States in 1891. So that was it was before Ellis Island. So he
Oh,
landed somewhere in New Jersey. And it was around before the great wave of immigration in the beginning of the 20th century started. He was like a little ahead of the curve, I guess. But like so many other Sicilians, I imagine, though I don't know for sure, I imagine his motivation was to escape poverty, because this was a dirt poor town, and in Sicily in those times was in really bad shape economically.
yeah.
So he was, but I give him really credit. He brought his wife and his daughter and came over on a steamship and came to the United States, ended up in the Lower East Side of New York, ran a grocery store like so many Italian-American, Sicilian immigrants, and made a life for himself. And my grandfather was born in this country, and my father, and of course me. So, but he assimilated. He wanted to assimilate, and my grandfather did too. He didn't want to be identified particularly as a Sicilian. There was a lot of discrimination in the beginning part of the
Yeah.
20th century against Italians. And so there was no speaking of the language. And my grandfather married an Irish woman, and my father married a woman of Irish descent. And by the time it got to me, it was just totally watered down. We were totally Americanized, and there was really no talk of the Italian heritage. But I was always interested in it. There was something
Right.
in me, I think, that propelled me to explore that heritage as I got older, and began traveling to Italy, studying the language, becoming fluent in Italian, knowing the past as it is now, and meeting the people that I'm related to. And so it's led to a really wonderfully rich experience for me, sort of born out of nothing other than the fact that I had an Italian last name. So that's sort of that's the Italian part of it. So I can't really give you any great stories about seven fishes dinner on Christmas Eve, or Mama's great lasagna, because Mama made pot roast and and spaghetti can. So I really didn't have much of
Oh,
an Italian upbringing. But again, it sort of, I guess it made me who I am. But you wondered if I'd always wanted to be a television journalist, and the answer to that question is yes. And when I was in high school, I decided early on that I grew up in a household without a father. My father died when I was very young, and my mother
right.
never remarried. And she was
Mm.
had a lot on her plate. I have three siblings, and quite honestly, they were harder to care for than I was. I was always the more independent one. And so, absent of some kind of father figure or a really active maternal figure, how do you learn what's going on in the world? I'm going to become a journalist. They get the
Ah,
keys to the city. They get to see what's out there, and then they learn about it, and they can tell others about it. So it seemed like a natural thing. And so I quickly got a job at the high school newspaper. I became editor of the high school newspaper, and I'm very proud to say that in those days, I was able to turn this newspaper from kind of just the silly, typical high school newspaper where we talk about the cheerleaders' uniforms and the pom-pom girls. We would report on things like drug abuse and smoking in the bathrooms. And the high school principal would always call me into the office, and he'd have his head in his hands like this, and he'd be saying, "Bill, why are we airing our dirty laundry in public?" And I would give him a lecture about journalism. Well, we went on to win the number one newspaper in high school newspaper in the state, which got me a job part-time working for the big daily newspaper in Phoenix, the Phoenix Gazette. And then I ended up getting a job at the local television station, which is a Hollywood style tale in and of itself, if you care to hear it.
why not? That's why you're here. And by the way, we're going to go back a little bit to the Italian thing, like when
Sure.
you went back and did a documentary and all that. So let's hear it. Let's hear the Hollywood style thing that happened. Go ahead.
So I wrote a letter to the news director. How I got into television, it could not happen today. It just couldn't.
Mm.
But I figured out a way to do it. Very unorthodox back then, but I figured out a way to do it. So I wrote a letter to the news director of the local television station, who happened to be the big anchorman at the station anyway. And I said, I'm a high school student. I'm interested in journalism. Can I come down to the TV station and see how you put a newscast on? And he called me at home one night at dinner. He called me, and I said, "Wow, this guy's calling me. And he said, why don't you come on down and we'll give you a tour. So I went down to the station, introduced myself, and I spent the entire day down there. And I guess I must have been, appealing in some sense to the people around there. I was curious and an interesting kid, I guess. And at the end of the day, they said, it's nice meeting you. Come back anytime. Well, that was the wrong thing to say to me, because I took the bus down there from my house to the TV station every day during the summer. At the end of the summer, I was shooting film. I learned how to edit film. I was carrying, I was helping to write stories, had all of that, had all the skills down necessary. So now I go off to college and I'm bored to death. I'm taking a journalism class and they're teaching stuff that I just can do and have done.
You already did it, that you've already done. Yeah, no, I get that. Go ahead. I love these stories. Go ahead.
I already did it. And one day the phone rings in the dorm room, and it's the same news director. And he says, I'd like to offer you a job if you're interested. Of course. He said, we'd like to make you the weekend news producer. And I thought, wow, so weekend news producer, that's a very important job. I'll take it. So I became the weekend news producer, which really meant that you did everything. You got there early in the morning and you left late at night, and you wrote, you wrote the entire newscast, which was interesting because the anchorman was this handsome young man about town, not particularly talented journalistically or interested in anything except being on TV. So, but I would write every word that he read, and I took great pride in producing these scripts for him. But I always knew as I was writing them, I said, I'd be able to do this myself. And I'd imagine that as I'm writing it, that I would be on the air delivering it. So one Sunday night, this story sounds like a Hollywood story, but as Henry Kissinger famously said once, it has the added advantage of being true. So one Sunday night, the newscast on at 10 o'clock, he would go out to dinner between the newscasts, come back, and I'd hand him his script, and he'd straighten his tie and go on. Well, now it's quarter to 10, and he's not around. It's Sunday night in Phoenix, and I'm looking around, and there's the only other guy there is the weatherman, and he's like this 100-year-old professor from the college that stands up there and talks about the temperature. And I thought, so about a couple minutes later, the tap on my shoulder, and there he is. It's the anchorman. He showed up. I don't know where he was. He points to his throat and he says, I've lost my voice. He said, what are we going to do? And I said, I looked around. I don't know, should I call somebody? Should I go down to the radio station? What should I do? And then I said the words that sealed my fate. I said, give me your tie. And so he gave me the tie. Now I'm 19 years old. And I went on and I read the news that I'd written. And I'm sure it was horrible, but I thought I did a great job. And that was done. The next day, I got a call from the boss. I need to see you in the office right away. And I thought, I'm either going to get canned right away. I don't know what's going to happen. So I got
maybe a new tie. I don't know. Go ahead.
Went down there, and he just chewed me up one side. How dare you put yourself on the air like that? You didn't call anybody. You didn't do anything. How dare you? You don't have the right to do that. You don't have the experience. But then he calmed down and he said, you did a good job, kid. That's what he said. You did a good job, kid. He said, when he goes on vacation the next, I'd like you to fill in for him. So that was that was really the beginning of my career. And I ended up working there for another few years and ended up going to San Diego, then to San Francisco, then to Denver, then to Portland, and then finally to Los Angeles. So I sort of climbed the ladder up there in local news, working my way up to the top.
The journey is outstanding. I'm not sure people realize the journey, especially back then. I mean, I started much later than you did. And even though the 90s, I don't know, to me, it seems like it was yesterday. But in the 90s, we didn't have the internet. We didn't have anything. And I have sort of a similar story. I would be handing out my resume outside of the building where they did Good Morning America. And it's in the 90s. And the same thing with NBC Saturday Night Live, just to get somebody to bring me up there. You know what I mean? To just do something. And then when you're in the room, that's when the opportunity happens, right? Somebody doesn't show up. Somebody is stumbling into the office. You get to hand your resume to somebody else who's higher up. It's like, you just have to show up. You just have to sort of do something and say yes. The world is way different now, but I always tell young people, if I ever do a talk, it's like, just show up and say yes. I mean, as long as it's safe, right? And that's what you did. You showed up and you said yes. I love that. But maybe that's just the personality of a journalist. I don't know. I very often wouldn't take no. Be like, oh, really? Okay, I'll go over here. You know, because you're curious by nature, right? You've got a story, somebody else's story you want to tell. It's really hard to say no, but that's why you're the journalist you are, the award-winning journalist that you became. By the way, did you prefer anchoring, local anchoring, or out on the field? I've been asked that too. I'm curious what your answer is.
I enjoyed both. I guess, and you're in the
Right.
field. It depends on the story. If you're in the booth anchoring, it depends on how boring the script might be. You know, it got. You know, I worked weekends for a long time, and it was, you know, it wasn't that exciting. Things there wasn't that much
Right.
going on. You know.
Right. Well, it depends. LA now, forget it. On weekends, this is when everything's happening at 2 in the morning. If in fact you want to be out on the streets at 2 in the morning reporting, different conversation. Let me dial back a little bit to the whole Italian thing. You did go back, right? And you did a documentary there. I want to talk about that. And you also went back to visit the little town where your great grandpa was from. Could you talk to us about that?
Yes, like I said, the town is called Mezzogiuso,
Yeah.
my great grandfather was born there, and I went back in, oh boy, 30 years ago, a little bit longer than that, for the first time, and I brought a camera with me, and I wanted to shoot a documentary based on my, you know, my heritage. And I got to the town. I'd never been to Italy. Got off the plane, rented a car, ended up in Mezzogiuso, a little mountain town. Went to, didn't speak the language, very little, tiny bit of language. I had my business card, and I went to the town of the bar, and I tried to talk to the bartender, and I asked him if there were any Lagattutas here. And
Ah.
he looked at me and he said in Italian, he said, "Ci sono molti," which means there are many. But I thought he said "Ci sono morti," which means they're all dead. So I thought
Oh.
I've come all this way for nothing. But then he made a phone call, and a little man showed up, about 5'2", big black rimmed glasses, and introduced himself as Salvatore Lagattuta, distant
Oh.
relative, I'm sure. And he was thrilled that I'd been there. This was in must have been 1980 something or other. Thrilled that I'd shown up, and sort of adopted me for a few weeks. And I
Oh.
stayed in there was a monastery at the edge of town that was kind of disused, but there was a monk that lived there, and he found I lived in a little cell in the monastery, and I stayed there every day. Every day Salvador would show up and take me around and introduce me to other Lagattutas. I met them all, and there were several
Wow.
hundred. We never could prove the direct connection, and I kept, you know, looking for little ties and all that kind of stuff. But we ended up making a really clever little documentary about the town, about the family, about my experience, and brought it back to. I was at KNBC at the time, and I hired an editor to edit it for me, who couldn't edit things at the time, and I kind of did this off the books. But
Mm.
I wanted to put it on television. I really thought it was really good. So
Something, yeah.
we got it finished, and I made an appointment to see the general manager of the TV station at the time, and I said, "I need a half hour of your time." I didn't tell him what it was, and I went in and I said, "I'd like to play this for you," and he said, "Okay." We turned down the lights and played the tape for half an hour. At the end of the half of the hour, he was crying, and
Oh.
I'd like your permission to put this on television on a Sunday. It's the Sunday after Thanksgiving. I think this would be a touching story to put on. And he said, absolutely. And
Oh.
so we ran it without commercials, and just the phones lit up, and, you know, one thing led to another.
Oh.
I was very quickly adopted by the Italian-American community in Los Angeles that you know so well, and ended up making a lot of friends and showing it around. Fast forward 33 years, my wife and I were there 4 or 5 years ago. We went back to Mezzogiuso actually back to look up some of the people that I had encountered way back when. They were all alive except little Salvatore Lagattuta, who had died a few
Mm.
back. I went to the grave and paid my respects to him. But everyone else, just, you know, you'd walk down the street and they'd pop out and they would remember you. And little kids who were little kids at the time are all grown up with families. And we spent a great, you know, out in the country eating cheese and working the land and seeing everything and seeing everybody. So it's been a really interesting experience. We'll probably be back there later this year if we can swing it.
Mm. You said also that you and your wife have been taking up Italian, right?
Yes. So when I turned 50, my birthday gift from my beloved wife, who's sitting off camera listening and chuckling now, she said, "No, you need to go. You need to finish your language studies. You need to go to Italy and actually learn." So I booked a course in a really far away place in Calabria, of all places, an off the beaten track Italian school, and went and stayed in this little town for 3 weeks, and where the only person who spoke English was the teacher, and he wasn't a very good teacher, to be honest with you. But I used the experience to walk around and just talk to people. And when I came back after that, I didn't want to lose what I had learned, and so I went on Craigslist. Just thought about that. I haven't thought about this in a long time. I went on Craigslist and I found an Italian guy who was giving Italian lessons, and he lived over in the North Hollywood, and he was an actor, and he was a good teacher. And I would go meet with him, once or twice a week, and we would have conversations. And then one day he called me and he said, "Bill, I'm very sorry, I can no longer teach you." And I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, I'm working as an actor here in Hollywood, and I want to lose my Italian accent, so I've decided I will never speak another word of Italian."
Oh my goodness.
I said, "Okay." So I ended up finding another Italian tutor who I worked with for a number of years, and in the end of the day, it all worked out, and the language skills are great. I think my wife Judy was seeing all of this, and then she became very good friends with an Italian woman that she would meet at the local swimming pool in LA, and they struck up a very deep friendship. And in order to continue the friendship, Judy began learning Italian, and now she studies it pretty much full time. And she is just maybe one hair behind me, but we're what we say, we're quasi fluent. We're really we can speak to anybody about anything in Italian. So we enjoy the language very much.
But I love how you came full circle, right? You didn't necessarily grow up in a real Italian upbringing where they'd be making the spaghetti sauce and arguing over meatballs on Sunday like what I had. But as you got older in life, you found your way to that side of your family. And what a beautiful and honestly really organic way to do that. You just sort of fell into it basically because of your curiosity, really. And look where it's led you and your wife and family. So beautiful. And here you are now with the olive trees behind you on your farm. Let's talk about what you're doing now. You're quite an accomplished artist. Yes, people, he's also an accomplished artist. Like, what can't you do? Seriously. Next, you're going to be like bottling the olive oil and the tomato sauce. I think whatever you touch, Bill, it turns to a success because I think your heart's really into it. I can't
control the weeds on this property. That's what I can't do. I just can't. They're killing me. They're defeating me. No. So when I left television news, I decided I'd always been an artist, and I thought I wanted to open a gallery and a studio. So I did in a section of Los Angeles that's known as Frogtown. It's Elysian Valley, and it's in this. Back then, when I did this, no one really knew about Frogtown.
Right.
It's this little sort of a triangle between the 5, the 110, and it's right near Dodger Stadium. And it's sort of this kind of the land that time forgot in LA, because LA sort of bypassed with development and it became kind of run down. But artists discovered it. Few artists discovered it because rents were cheap. And
right.
I was among them, and we were down there. We had an annual art walk where we opened our studios and had people come in and look at the work. Now, Frogtown has become very hip and chic, and there are coffee shops and hipsters and wine bars and breweries and all kinds of art galleries down there. But I like to think I was one of the pioneers. But I pursued my art very aggressively. I made a lot of paintings and metal sculpture. I had a few pretty big commissions from some local architects, including one in Frogtown. There's a large metal installation that's, I hope, has not been graffitied yet, but it's down there. I found that work to be very rewarding, enjoyed it very much. I have not had the time to pursue a lot of it here, simply because the developing the land and the buildings we have here has been a sort of an artistic project in and of itself. So once I have a studio here, but right now it's filled with a lot of farm equipment, and I've just got to kind of, there's not enough time in the day for me to do what I want to do. that's the
Yeah.
real crime.
I mean, you've been living up there full time now for 3 years, but I do want to talk briefly about your Arrow series. You've got a beautiful display, actually, if you were to pan over for a second. There you go. There you go. Keep going. There you go. That's pretty outstanding. Can you tell us about that piece and also a little more about your, about the steel panels and the Arrow series? Because your work is outstanding. And look, you've got, hang on a minute. There's a section or whatever on the website, right? Faces, steel heads, busts of people, forms. I mean, your artwork is pretty extraordinary. You're sort of racing through it, but I don't want to race through it that quickly. There's a lot of it's beautiful. Tell us a little bit about the piece that you just showed us.
Well, it's interesting because knowing a lot of artists and being around them in their studios, sometimes artists get I don't want to say obsessed, but they're a certain shape or an object or something that really catches their, I don't know, catches their spirit, and I think of Frank Gehry, the great architect.
Yeah.
And he has always been obsessed with fish. And in his early work, he did a lot of drawings of fish, and he actually created an enormous fish sculpture in Spain, in Barcelona. And anyway, so for me, the shape that for some reason, I can tell you the reason, drew my attention were arrows, and there is a great Italian connection. We were traveling in Apulia, which is one of my favorite regions of Italy. And we're walking down, we like to walk and hike, and we're walking down these not abandoned, but little used roads. And there were a lot of arrow signs sort of pointing you in different directions. They'd been out in the sun, they'd been weather beaten, they were cracked and rusted. And I just fell in love with them. I tried to bring one home with me, but I couldn't get it unscrewed off the pole. I probably would have ended up in Italian jail if they caught me. But I came back, I painted my first arrow on a metal panel, and it said something to me. Arrows, forward motion, it takes you in a direction, it leads you somewhere. And I became obsessed with arrows. And I did a series of arrows on metal panels. And I sourced the metal panels from an old warehouse, most of them from an old warehouse. It got to the point where people would give me metal panels. And it was an old warehouse that was selling, oddly enough, it was selling pre-made artwork, like factory-made paintings, little flowers and things like that. Guy went out of business. Yeah. And I like the metal shelving, and it was the ideal size for me. And they were all beaten up, which I liked. And I learned how to rust metal and to make it and to age it so it looks like it's been out in the world for 100 years, but it may be a brand new piece. And I began doing a series of that. I also began experimenting with different shapes and language forms and sort of different textures. And I love the metal. I weld and do all of that. So it's something that inspired me. The Arrow series is very important to me. And I don't know, people have responded to it, kind of almost looks like roadside art at some point. I've heard that, but I like it. I like the colors, and we have that big piece hanging out on our outside patio. It lives outside. It continues to rust. It continues to age like like a fine bottle of something or other, but it's getting older and better. Like me, I hope.
Wow. You've never been formally trained, have you?
No.
In art. Wow. That's incredible. I mean, it comes from here. And as you said to me off camera once, I mean, your artwork tells a story. Isn't that what art is about? Whatever story we see in it, you have your story of how you, about the arrows, but also the forms and the steel heads really spoke to me. I mean, I'm going to encourage people to look it up on your website. By the way, what is your website? Tell people if they want to look up some of your artwork or more about you.
It's BillLagattuta.com.
Okay.
And then we'll also tell you, if you want to see our latest work, our latest work is MitsikaFilms.com. That's our film company. We make, I think, brilliant little short films about a lot about food and sustainable agriculture are a lot of the work we've done lately. And so we sort of shifted into that kind of work. So MitsikaFilms.com, our company's called Mitsika Films. Mitzica is interestingly enough, Mitzica is a Sicilian, the word in Sicilian dialect. Not many Italians don't even know the word. Mitzica means, I'm going to be very judicious about this. It means holy, holy cow. That would be the polite way of saying it.
Okay.
In a good way, like, oh, Mitzica, I found a 10 euro note on the sidewalk, kind of thing. So when we were in Italy, we were in Puglia 4 years ago, and we stayed at a little farmhouse, and across the street from us, there was a garbage dump. They bring their garbage to these dumps, and they're very, very messy, and someone had dumped a bunch of old mattresses. And on top of the pile of mattresses was a little brown dog sitting there, seemingly waiting for us to go up. This dog came over to us the next morning and has never left us since. We brought the dog home with us to Los Angeles. The dog's name is Mitzica, and because she really is just a complete and total joy, and sort of symbolizes the you're going to meet Mitzica in 2 seconds. And so that's our film, Mitzica Films. Here comes Mitzica. Bring her in.
Where is she?
She's right here. Here you go. Hey, Mitzi. This is Mitzica.
Oh.
Mitzica.
Oh, what a little love. Oh, she's just a love. Hi, Mitzica. What a beautiful, beautiful story. Gosh, a beautiful story to end our interview on, Bill. Honestly, it's really, you've really come full circle. Any parting words you want to tell our audience? Gosh.
Just ignore the noise, follow your dreams, go forward, push ahead. Don't let the turkeys get you down. Just keep going. There's a lot of bad vibrations in the world today. Don't let it get to you. Be good, be strong, be there for your loved ones, and make your world as good as you can. And if everybody does that, the world itself will be better, I think. At least that's my philosophy.
Yeah, and a page out of your book, Turn Off the TV.
And
right?
Turn off the TV. That's a good one, yes.
Turn off the TV. Gosh, Bill Lagattuta, you have been a delight. And say hi to your wife, Judy, who's over by the side there, and your adorable dog, and the rest of the family. Enjoy your time on the farm. I hope you get the weeds collected. I have a feeling you're going to figure that out too. And I look forward to talking to you again. I really do. So thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And my name is Deborah Zara Cobelt, and our podcasts are Little Italy Podcast and Deborah Zara Cobelt, after my name. You can find our podcast anywhere, honestly, on video. You can find them on YouTube and Facebook and IGTV and all that stuff. And as an audio podcast, also anywhere you get your audio podcast. If you listen, just look up either of those and you will find our interview with Bill Lagattuta. Thanks a lot, Bill. You've been a delight. You really have. You brought me down some interesting stories that I recall, and just what a life you're continuing to lead. So thank you. And thank you, everybody, for joining us on our podcast, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Leave meeting.
Okay. Oh, he left.
Okay. How was that? Okay.
That was good.
Yeah, he was interesting.
Yeah, he's very interesting.